So this is pushing boundaries, and my guest today is it Mrs. or Miss, or how do you like to be called?
I'm a feminist, so it's Ms.
Okay, uh, Ms. Ms. Feminist,
Actually,
Joan
I'm
Koenig.
18.
Joan, Joan Koenig, Joan Koenig. And Joan, please tell us a little bit about yourself. What is it? I know you live in Paris. You have lived in Paris for the last 30 years. What is it that you do?
Well, thank you. That's a lovely question. And I will try to answer it as succinctly as possible because,
No need to answer it succinctly. Any way you like is fine.
okay, I
Okay.
just have to smile because sometimes I think that every 10 years or so, I find myself taking a new path that I never would have imagined doing 10 years before. And so I'm
Right,
kind of wondering where I'm going to be 10 years from now,
right,
and even maybe how many more I have to come.
right.
But in terms of background, I was raised in the US. We lived in California, Washington State, and Washington, D.C. Successively.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very interested in music as a child. We had a piano at home, nobody played it, but I asked for lessons. And my parents were very happy. And so taking piano lessons meant walking down the street in a Los Angeles suburb to where Mrs. Schmidt taught the piano.
Mm-hmm.
And so I officially had my piano lessons, and I would learn those little pieces, but then I would go home and improvise. And I started sort of just teaching myself about music theory by doing it, which I'm not a prodigy at all. A lot of people can do this. You just have to open the door and not put yourself in a box, thinking that you cannot do it. So then my family moved to Washington State, where there were some wonderful music programs, including orchestral programs. And I decided that I simply had to play in an orchestra. So I chose the flute to play in an orchestra. And I was absolutely in love with the instrument. I just found it very beautiful. And I found the position and the sound wonderful. So little by little, I was kind of keeping piano and flute going at the same time. And then we moved to Washington, D.C. And I had wonderful teachers on both instruments, but I think I began leaning more toward the flute because I was enjoying so much playing in an orchestra and simply playing with other people, because as a flutist, you play at least with a pianist or a harpist or a guitarist. You don't really do much on your own. And I was a little social being, so I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And then I went to the Interlochen Arts
Oh,
camp, which
yes.
is a high-level musical
Mm-hmm.
camp when I was 16. And I realized that I had been in a little bit of a bubble because we had highly talented children from all over the world. And I realized that if I was going to go for it as a pianist, I would have already had to be playing Mozart concertos by the time I was 10, which was not the case. So because the flute is an instrument you cannot start too young because your body's not ready for it, I felt like I was still it was still possible to have a professional career as a flutist. So I went home and I decided I was going to reverse practicing and up the flute to 3 hours a day and put the piano at 1 hour a day. And it's funny because I was so disciplined, and I look at parents and children nowadays, and I wonder, what is it? There are children who just have this desire and they impose their own discipline. And that was definitely my case. It wasn't, my parents weren't forcing me whatsoever. In fact, I'm quite sure my father, who was an aeronautical engineer, might have preferred that I become a doctor or a lawyer. But that was not going to be the case. And they gracefully acknowledged that this was a child with a one on a one-way street. So I had a wonderful time my last 2 years in high school because I barely went to school. They had a program where I just basically had to pass. And I was only studying literature at that point, only went 2 hours a day. And so I just practiced the rest of the time. And I entered lots of competitions, and I just loved that experience. I was able to play with the National Symphony as a soloist. I had numerous recitals. So I was really full-fledged into this life. And then I was accepted at the Juilliard School. So I began there when I was 18. And it was a surprisingly lonely endeavor, I have to say. First of all, because I was a big reader, and I thought that being a musician was an extraordinary thing. But I also thought that to be a musician, you had to be a full-on artist. So I was reading Rilke and Thomas Mann, and I was just into, Ethan Frome, every form of questioning that an adolescent could do. And I had planned that I would go to Juilliard and I would find all sorts of like-minded geeks, and that we would sit and play music and geek out on our reading and our love of art and literature. And guess what? That wasn't the case. There were a few people who wanted to party. They did not want to talk about philosophy. And I discovered that many musicians, classical musicians, are born into it, and they assume the famous 10,000 hours of practicing, kind of because they have to, and they're good at it. And did they really choose it? I'm not always sure. So after that, after Juilliard, I wanted to come to Paris because a little known fact, or rather arcane fact about France, is that there's an incredible school of woodwind instrumental playing, the oboe, bassoon, flute, and many young flutists come to France to study with the great flute masters because they have an incredible instrumental technique. I think it has to do with the fact that French is spoken very far in front of the mouth. So they have this incredible articulation, because the flute is the only instrument that you don't put in your mouth. It's sitting on the edge of your mouth. So all articulation, which means the starting of a note, the t, is very far forward in your mouth. And I think the French have this incredible sound and articulation also because French is spoken very far in front of the mouth. And the vowels and the consonants are very, very precise. And you can hear a big difference between an American and a German and a French flute player. You can in a second.
Amazing. Yes.
So I had planned to stay for 1 year.
Yes.
But I was having so much fun because I'd sort of always been in love with Europe. I'd come as a child, I'd come later during a summer period. And I just thought, I thought I want to speak another language fluently. I couldn't stand the idea of being yet another entitled American who only speaks English and makes everybody else learn their language.
Right.
But I also wanted to travel. I wanted to learn, my goal was to learn German and Italian and French. So French is fluent right now. German and Italian they're doing okay, but I hope that they'll both get up to a better level sometime soon. So after a few years in France, I was exposed to the French National Music Conservatory system because I was asked to replace somebody. And to put it gently, I was appalled. I was supposed to be giving 20-minute flute lessons to children who were also having 2 hours of what they call solfège, so it's music theory. And there was no piano in the room, so I couldn't play the piano accompaniments for these children. And I remember going to the director of the school and saying, first of all, could I have longer lessons? And can you give me a room with a piano in it? And they just looked at me as though I was absolutely insane. And the answer was not even a no. It was, please leave the office, you're bothersome.
Dismissed.
Dismissed. Absolutely. Absolutely. So what's funny is that when I finished it was replacing a teacher who was out. And basically what happened is a lot of the children left when I left, and I had to open up a private practice. So this was the beginning of a project which I now think falls into the category of God protects fools and drunkards. I was probably both. I decided I would open a music school in Paris, and I knew nothing about French labor law. I knew nothing about fiscal issues in France. I just thought I'll find a room to rent, and I'll start a little school.
Yeah.
So fortunately, nothing terrible happened to me before I got guidance as to how to do this thing legally. And little by little, what happened is that it just, I was really trying to create a situation in which it's much more like North America, where music is part of your social life, it's part of your community life. Children play with other children. The emphasis is on instrumental learning and not the dreaded solfège, which is a national problem in France.
Right.
There's too much emphasis on note reading and not enough emphasis on actually music making. So what happened is, little by little, the school just kept growing. And I really began interested in developing what would become a really beautiful project. And I kept up my chamber music playing and that sort of thing for quite a while. But when I was 30, I had already had 2 children, and I realized that something had to go. So I wanted to put my playing on the back plate. And sometimes people think that that's a sacrifice. But in my case, I felt like I was learning more about music in general. And creating this school was kept stretching me to learn other styles of music and so on. So I really became passionate about it. But a funny thing began happening a few years into it, which is I began becoming interested more in children who were younger and younger and younger. So years after starting the music school, I was doing classes for children who were 3. And I was seeing such extraordinary musical ability, and from week to and memory, these children forgot nothing, and they were only having 45 minutes per week. So I thought, what would happen if I opened a musical preschool? What would happen if these children had music in their lives every day? So this came about the same time that I would say the whole neuroscience music cognition field began to really come out of research papers. There were some conferences, and there was a kind of a buzz around the world about the fact that music might be much more important than we formerly thought in terms of the mind and body construction. And there's been a lot of, there were a lot of neuromyths about this, but there are some things that now I think are quite solid peer-reviewed research, things that have not longitudinal studies that have been going on for sometimes 30 and 40 years. So I think that we can safely say that it is an enormous part of our human construction, and that we should not be negating it. It shouldn't be the last thing that's important in a child's school
Education. Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So then, out of all of this, I was seeing such extraordinary things with children on a day-to-day basis. I have 2-year-olds who can tell you that chord is major or minor. Of course, for them, it's a happy elephant or a sad elephant, but it doesn't matter. What they're attributing emotional valence to something which is completely abstract, which I find thrilling. So I began to realize that a lot of the exciting research on the subject is still in research papers. So then came the idea, I really wanted to write a book so that parents and educators and just the whole world could understand that we shouldn't be negating musical practice, especially now in a world where we're having increasing problems of attention and dissipated classrooms. Cell phones have wreaked havoc with major parts of our lives. And we're in a very narcissistic society, and I'm quite worried about it. And when children practice music very early on, I like to say they become a we at a moment when normally the ego and the I is predominant, but it's not, it's music that requires that. And you don't have to force the children. Music acts as a sort of a force field with its laws. And believe me, the children obey them because they don't actually like cacophony. They seek harmony, and they will master their impulses with nobody saying they have to, simply because they actually want to participate in this beautiful piece of music they're creating. So that was oh my goodness, was that a 10-minute answer to your question?
I love it. I love every word that you are sharing with me. Now, you said that children like harmony. They don't like cacophony. They like harmony.
Yes, yes. And they have very firm views about it. And it's quite interesting because you can measure their level of enculturation
Mm-hmm.
to music is extraordinarily well defined before they're even 3 years old. They interpret dissonances. So let's say a
Yes.
C and a C sharp together.
Yes.
They find that disagreeable. They love major thirds. If you want, I sometimes do this at the piano because I can have people hear it too.
Sure. Sure.
So I'll just move over to the
Yeah, sure.
piano. It's utterly fascinating to imagine that a 2-year-old child will say they don't like this sound.
They
But
don't
they
like
like this. They let me turn up the volume a little bit too. But they like this sound. And they will tell you that this is sad. And they will tell you that this is happy.
Ha.
And these are 2-year-olds. So you can imagine the level of absorption that they've had simply because they're hearing music around them all the time. You know, it's in elevators, it's in stores, maybe their parents are listening to music, but it's another thing, and I'd love your opinion about this
Yes.
too. Parents send me videos of their children improvising at the piano, and they, with no instruction whatsoever, they will tell you that these down here in the low notes, they will say that those are elephants or big scary animals, and they will say that everything in the top register, those are maybe they'll call
Mice.
fairies or mice or whatever.
Mice.
So this, to me, and I'd love your opinion about this, is this linked to the fact that their ancestors, in order to survive, had to be able to identify that big, loud sound as being a scary animal?
Makes sense. Makes sense. Makes absolute sense. And we carry it in our DNA over the ages, right?
That's it would appear so. I mean,
Yeah.
because it's not random. I've seen 50 tapes of these, and the children always do the same thing. Or they'll say this is like, they'll say those are ghosts.
Ghosts.
Ghosts, yes.
Now, these children that you see, are they specially selected or are they just average children?
I would say that unfortunately, there's a selection in the sense that we're a private school.
Right.
And in France, things are very black and white. There's private, and there's public, and there's no public funding for the private schools. And there's very little philanthropy currently in France because the fiscal motivation is not very strong. So private schools in France, they really are on their own. So these are children that whose parents can afford to pay for the school. And so these are probably the same parents that are also paying for tennis lessons or whatever. But they are not, these are not necessarily musical parents. These are average children in terms of their exposure to music. And the other extraordinary thing we see is that, the notion of perfect pitch. So being able to hear a note and sing it sol or G. That's supposedly 1 in 10,000 people.
Really?
But I don't believe it, because we do a special way of training their ears, in which the notes have a personality, so, and an image. So this is do do mi no do 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 mi no, and this would be sun, the sunshine. Then we have far, the phantom. So these sounds, which are as abstract as telling them, for example, that the color red is red.
Yes,
We're
right.
saying the sound you're hearing right now is sol, but we give it the nice sunshine feel to it. And then little by little, we strip away the accompaniment till the fact they're just down to just the sol. They don't get all the stuff. And you know what? They all can do it.
So you talk about improvisation. Can you explain the concept and what it involves?
Well, I'm kind of on a mission
Yes.
to repair what I think has been a mistake in the evolution of classical music. Classical music, there was improvisation in classical music all through the 19th century. It ended early in the 20th century. There was the last known school that taught classical improvisation was the Hochschule für Musik und Kunst in Berlin in 1904. And then it just disappeared, because at the same time, there was so much music that had been written, and it takes so much time to learn all of that music. So you've got to be really good at reading music. So the idea of actually having a natural rapport with music and hearing a tune like bum ba ba bum 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 bum, and being able to go to the piano and play, that was lost.
Yeah.
So we have this conundrum, which is that music and language are both oral traditions, and that's how children learn them. But music, classical music, has taken that away.
Right.
And part of the other thing that is so the oral tradition is gone, and also because it becomes something you read to play, children have also lost the ability to improvise. So what I think it's extremely important. I think that I call it, actually with very young children, I call it musical scribbling. And I tell their parent, we give them paper and crayons. So, and we tell them, I mean, we love their scribbling, but if you have a keyboard or any other instrument, you can even do it with pots and pans. If you put a child in front of a keyboard,
Yes.
they will play. They might do just strange things, and they often tell stories. You know, they'll say, I was walking home from school today. They'll just play around, and it gets, as their motor skills grow, their little improvisations become more and more melodic, and they begin to demonstrate their enculturation. They begin to go toward the musical codes of the culture they live in.
So,
and I think that I think it's hugely important. I think that we're it's really dreadful that experiencing music early in life is most often in the Western developed world through learning to read music.
Or watching television.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or playing on a computer where they hear only sounds. It's not really music, right?
Exactly. And there's something about making the sound yourself on an acoustic instrument. But I'm curious, what do you think about this? The fact that very young children, when given the opportunity, will actually spontaneously create music. What do you think about that, given your background and your study in very, in infants and toddlers?
Well, I think that's a wonderful question, and it has never come up.
Good.
So I'm totally flabbergasted. I don't have a ready-made answer to that. Can you just describe a little bit more the process? Like, let's say this 2-year-old child comes to your school. How do you start? What do you do the first time you see a child?
Well, we have classes for parents and babies.
Yes.
And one of the things we do, which I absolutely love,
Yeah.
is we have bells, little bells that sit on the floor, and they're just in this case we begin with just do re mi fa sol la si do, and there's always a pianist in the room. It's a course where there's one person in the circle with the families, and there's
Yeah.
one person at the piano. And actually, the person at the piano has to be an improviser, because we're asking them to make music, spontaneous music with the children. So what we start with are these bells that require no motor skills. Literally, the child can hit it with their hand.
Right.
And even very young babies give it a try. Of course, most of the time they pick up the bell and put it in their mouth.
Right.
But when they get a little older and they realize what's going on, they begin tapping on the bells, and the pianist will join them in exactly the same tempo. So what this child is understanding is that they are making music with somebody. And what's quite amazing is that the pianist at one point will give a very Western music indication that the piece is over by doing what we call tonic dominant. So the piece might have been going something like. And the child is just doing this on the bells.
Right.
And the pianist will do something like this, which is this cadence. And the child always stops spot on when they hear the cadence. So it's sometimes you can have the most beautiful spontaneous music making if the child is not going too fast and they're a little bit older.
Yes.
Sometimes there's just this incredible piece of music, and you see while it's happening that everybody in the room is reacting to it. And the child too becomes aware that they're making something beautiful. Sometimes they get self-conscious and stop, but often there's just a big smile. But they adjust. I've seen them, because I've tried it myself sometimes, by actually adjusting the tempo to see if the child will follow. They always do. And they always recognize the style of the music, because if I'm doing with those same 8 notes, we can have, so it's basically, so while they're playing, I can play something behind that's very like this. But with the same notes, I can also do. And the child always, or let's say 9 out of 10, adapts to the mood and begins, even with their gestures, moving to that music style that's proposed. So it just is clear to me that Homo sapiens are a musical species.
Yes, yes, yes. And do they move to the music or not?
Very much so. And in fact, one of my favorite stories, I put it in the book, is we often start this baby class with a short, long rhythm, because it's children, and everybody can hook on to that. Right. There's something about short, long. So just begin with this kind of thing, a dancey thing, where it's like a doop doop wah, a doop doop wah, doop doop wah, doop doop wah. We touch different body parts and so on.
Yeah.
One day, a little boy came in with his caretaker, and she actually had 2 children to take care of. So she plopped the little 6-month-old on the ground, and he began doing this. I'm moving back and forth.
Yes.
And I could tell he was asking for that rhythm. He remembered it from the week before. And when his teacher came in front of him and started doing a doop doop wah, doop doop wah, he just grinned, and he was moving so hard that he rolled over on the floor. He was so excited. So to me, he remembered that rhythm, and he liked it, and he wanted to do it again. And he was exactly 6 months old.
Amazing. So for how long do you see these children? Let's say you start them at 6 months. How long do they come to your school? For how many more months or years? How does it?
The full program is the ultimate goal is they come to the baby classes once a week. Some parents come twice a week. And then if they can, because it is a financial question,
Yes.
we're really working hard on scholarships, but
Mhm.
it is a financial question. So
Sure.
some of the children can come to our full-time preschool and kindergarten. So they will spend from the ages of, let's say 2.5 until the age of 6 when they go into primary school. And some of the children will go into another preschool, and they stay in a music school, and they just have, again, once a week lessons. But when the children have gone through the entire preschool program,
Mhm.
I like to say that we know we've accomplished our goal when we can hum a tune with
Yes.
no indication, literally just maybe singing ba, ba, da, 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 dum. And the child will go to the piano, and they'll play it, and then they'll sing as the note names. Sol, mi, re, do, re, mi, sol. And then they'll tell us the rhythm, which is a quarter note. In French, you say noir, da, 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 dum. It won't work in English, but basically they're able to tell us what rhythm they've just played as well. So to me, this means that the child has integrated pure abstract sound with their bodies, and also with the whole nomenclature that music uses. So to me, it's the same thing as a child who, let's say, here's a phrase they like, or here's a story they like, and that they will go and then, like The Cat in the Hat or something like that, or
Mhm. Mhm.
whatever their favorite story is. Or they want to tell you about something that they've done, and they will actually write it down for you. And it won't be, the writing will be a bit phonetic. It'll be some creative spelling. But the most important thing is that the child wants to relate their story, and they're going to use the tools they have, because they're beginning to understand how writing corresponds to the desire to tell stories.
So what is the oldest child that you have at your school?
Oh, 18. I mean, we go up.
Oh.
We have regular classical music. We stop for the full-time preschool.
Yes.
That stop when they're 6. But
Mhm.
for the music school, it
Yes.
goes up to 18, and we have jazz sections and musical theater sections, and so the musical part goes up until basically baccalaureate 18. But I feel a lot of parents are asking us to develop a primary school that has this musical base, and I tell them, I'd rather open more and more preschools and kindergartens, because I really believe that it's this period from birth, and as even before birth,
Right.
on till the age of 6, that I think will determine so many things in their lives.
Mhm. So have you tried, speaking of before births, have you tried to get pregnant mothers to improvise and listen to music?
That'll be the next step, Thomas, because in fact, actually, the next step I'd like to take is to have a kind of a daycare center for children
Mhm.
between the ages of basically walking and 3 years old,
Mhm.
maybe even earlier, like a crèche, where music is a big part of their lives, but on a day-to-day basis. So it's not just the once a week class.
So do you have any follow-ups of these children? Like, how do they turn out?
Yes, we have now we've been doing this for, let's see, it started in 2008. So we're going on 15 years of the
Mhm.
daily music programs.
Mhm.
There are a number of children that are pursuing music actively. But I think that the biggest feedback we have is that, first of all, the children tell us when they go to a regular primary school, they say, we miss having music every day so much. And actually, one of the little girls came back and told her mother, I just don't understand what's wrong with this new school. We don't sing. We don't sing. We don't make music together. They have no
Right.
instruments.
Right. Right.
But I think that I think one of the biggest factors that we're seeing consistently is that these children are well adjusted. They have, I think they have less problems with self-control than some other children. And I think we've also seen there's a level of empathy, and I would even go as far as saying intuition with these
Yeah.
children, because they've been learning to listen to each other on a nonverbal way for a very long time.
Interesting. So, have you observed sort of any children excelling at creativity?
Yes, I would say that that's another common denominator. We encourage it so much that I don't see, these are children who create poems. They they invent songs. I think that their general way of thinking is has a bit more fantasy and a bit more whimsy in it. But one of the things I'm very interested in, it would be interesting, this will take longer. We need a real longitudinal study. I think that, and many children do this, many children sit at the piano and they're trying to learn to play a song. So it's a,
Yeah.
but when they begin, they're going to play,
Oops.
and they can't work it out. Right? Oops, because those notes, the note they need to find is not consecutive. So they sometimes will take a half an hour to get to, and then they'll play it again for until the entire building is ready to scream. But to me, this is creative problem solving, and I think that there is a kind of independence in music, because nobody can do it for you. Your parents can't sit down and put your hands on the piano or the guitar or whatever. And I think that this ability, looking for a song and sitting at the piano until you find it, must be a part of what gives the children confidence later on to think, okay, I have a problem here. There is no answer. I have to find it. But this idea of not thinking, oh, what's the answer? I don't have it. I'll have to go complain to somebody. Instead, I really think that maybe they might more likely have the reaction of, I need to solve this problem. Of course I can do it. I'll figure it out.
Right. So are they more self-confident?
I think so, but this would require a bigger study, which I would love to do, and we're talking about it with some of the French government officials, because you would need to take the socioeconomic factor out of it. Are these children confident because they come from very loving families?
Right.
And I really, really want to see what happens when you're dealing with a classroom of children that come from challenging backgrounds.
Right.
My intuition is that we could be saving a lot of lives by having this kind of creative music program in preschools, in their kindergartens around the world.
Yes.
Because
I totally agree. Yes.
The language deficiency. There's two things that worry me. Children who are in challenging situations, we know that their language skills are below normal. Literacy, I don't know about Canada, but literacy in the US is a growing catastrophe.
Oh yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And secondly, this feeling of not belonging, I think is going to have extremely deleterious effects in children's development in the future. And I feel like we have a solution. We can prove it scientifically. We can prove it socially. And if this was a new thing, Dr. Verney, if somebody came to you and said, I have got this product in which we're going to help children develop empathy, work on their creative problem solving skills. We're going to work on their ability to work together. We're going to work on their literacy. And it's all in this beautiful package. And the cherry on the cake is that they love it. So they want to do it all the time. Everybody would say, where can I get that? Where can I buy that? So the fact that it's as old as the hills, maybe that's why nobody is seeing it for what it is? Or is it this perennial need for something new that is making educators ignore it?
You said that you had two children.
Yes.
How old are they now?
Oh, goodness, if you can call tall 34-year-old people children. I have a 34-year-old son who's actually taken over the directing of the music school, which I'm
Wonderful.
thrilled
Wonderful.
about.
Wonderful.
And
Yes.
I have a 31-year-old daughter who has blessed us all with a beautiful little baby who is now 5 months old.
And attending your school?
Oh, not yet, not yet. They live in another section of Paris. She's a little too, just a tiny bit too young, but she's getting a lot of music between her uncle and her grandmother. But my daughter is an actress, and so I would say that the creative side definitely kind of played out in both children.
Wonderful. And are your parents still alive?
No, they're both they both died. My mother quite recently, my father years ago, actually.
So one of your children at least is following in your footsteps, right?
Absolutely. And the my daughter, in a way, she is such an incredibly creative person that even if she's not officially a musician, I feel as though we're kind of all in this very creative and very I would say enterprising. You know, I would say both children go for what they want. And I love the title of your podcast, Pushing Boundaries, because it's actually something I'm quite interested in. Where does that ability, how do you develop this kind of confidence and this kind of daring in young children?
Yes, yes. And
Where did that
so
come
many
from?
children, and of course, so many adults just don't have it. You know,
Yep.
as a psychiatrist, I see everyday people with low self-esteem. And it's pathetic because these are really accomplished, intelligent, fine people, and their self-confidence is about this low. It's very sad.
Yeah, but I think it's well, I think human beings, probably most of us on the planet, fight with self-confidence.
Yes.
I mean, maybe people might perceive me to be as someone who's self-confident, but I think they have no idea what's under the surface and how many times a day I doubt myself. I think that the trick is to learn to live with it and to realize that it can be helpful. It keeps you humble, but that that as long as it's not incapacitating, that's
Right.
what I think that I would hope to somehow bring to children. And that's what I'm afraid of when I think of children who are in challenging situations. Will their self-doubt be incapacitating?
Is there is there one child in all the years, what is it, since 2008 that you started this?
The preschool started in 2008. The music
Okay.
school started, he might not have been born yet. No, actually, the music school started in 1986.
1986. Okay, so my question is there one child sort of in all these years that you have seen that kind of stands out in your memory very vividly, like you will never forget this one child?
You know what? That would I wouldn't be able to say just one.
Okay, several.
There are moments. For example, there was an incredible moment with a little girl who turned 3 while she was at the school.
Yes.
And we introduced Mandarin as a language to the children because we want them to have exposure to cultures from all over the world, but also because, as you know, learning languages at an earlier age, you can set the groundwork that you cannot do after a certain age.
That's right.
So the idea is we say that we're trilingual because the children learn French, English, and music, but we do bring in Mandarin. So to make it fun, we wrote them a little opera about the Chinese New Year and Yen the dragon. And this was a fascinating experience for me because I was working with their Mandarin teacher, and she was telling me that of just a very few phrases that we were going to put for the children to learn. And she recorded them for me, and I could not retain them. And especially because saying the tone correctly,
Yes.
it's not
Yes.
it has to be so
Yes.
it was very hard for me. And so I started writing melodies that corresponded basically to how the tones work, whether it's flat, up, going upwards, going downwards, or doing the in between. And as soon as I wrote them to music, I could remember them. And so I used a very culturally identified scale, which is called a
Yes.
pentatonic scale. It's a 5-note scale. So it
Oh,
sounds
yes. Yes.
right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So one of the phrases was, so it's a C major pentatonic scale.
Mhm.
And we were working on this in January. And this little girl who became 3 was coming by the school one day in the afternoon. I was there actually just having some fun with some children. And she was coming to say goodbye because they were moving to out of France. And I was improvising on a C major pentatonic scale with some other kids. So I was just kind of and this little girl started bellowing from the side of the room where she came in. So she heard the C major pentatonic scale, and she belted into what this reminded her of. And she sang her little heart out for about 5 minutes, and she would have gone on much longer had we not had to move on. So I thought that was quite an amazing example of memory.
Yes.
The fact that it was her autobiographical memory was involved, because I think she was very proud of the fact she participated in this little show. But the very fact that she heard a specific musical scale and all the firecrackers that set off, I just thought that was absolutely amazing. And she's and I have to say, she's not the only one. It was just it was the first time I'd seen it actually in such a young child, and to such a degree of perfection. She rendered all the songs in the opera spotlessly in a completely foreign language.
So do you still do some on-hands teaching, or is it all sort of organizational?
Well, actually, I went back to hands-on teaching this year.
Yeah.
I just have a couple classes of babies and parents, just because I love it so much. It's I really I have wonderful staff, but I was a little bit I was missing having a little bit of direct contact with young children. Also, I feel like I'm still experimenting. There are things I still want to try and see what happens, because there's not enough. This age group is grossly underestimated, and there's not enough serious, I would say, high-level musical programs going on, because everybody thinks that they can't really do anything at that age. But I think, there is one more thing I would love to tell you
Yes.
about an exceptional child, because
Yes.
I found this fascinating. In our school, we give musical names to the children. So when they come in, they sit in the circle, everybody has their musical name. And what's fascinating is within a few weeks, you might be Toma. But what's fascinating is you'll have 30 children who within a couple of weeks recognize everybody's name, and sometimes before their teachers do.
Huh.
If the child won't say, that was me,
Yes.
one of the other children will say, it's
you.
you.
It's you.
Yeah, it's you.
It's
Yeah.
you. It's you.
So one time I was visiting one of the classrooms, and it was the youngest children. So these are 2 and 3-year-olds, and the teachers have names too. So the pianist at one point played this musical name, and I remember distinctly. It sounded like this. And I thought, what is this?
Right.
And the little boy said, it's Emily, but old.
Oh, old Emily.
And old. And actually, she's a 24-year-old, and the pianist is making a joke because her real name is. So all she did was put it slow and low.
Uh-huh.
So this led me down the rabbit hole of metaphor. And I'm sure you know that the book by Lakoff, and I can't remember the other name, called Metaphors We Live By.
No, I don't.
Oh, it's fascinating. They investigate the notion of metaphor as actually being highly linked to the human condition.
Oh,
So, you know, when you say I'm feeling down,
yes.
as opposed to I know people in high places, they say these basic metaphors have to do with sometimes being alive or dead. If you're up, it means that you're alive.
Yes.
And when you're low, and you might just be flat, you might either be sleeping or deceased.
Right.
So what I found amazing was that this little boy, he understood that that was the music for Emily, but he heard it was too low and it was too slow. So he equated an older person
Mm-hmm.
as being that music. So he was making this incredible metaphoric jump or demonstrating
Connection. Yeah.
his profound
Linkage.
knowledge of the human aging cycle, which I
Mhm.
doubt was in place by the age of 3.
Right.
And he came up with it spontaneously. And I just thought that was extraordinary. Again, how much these young children are capable of making these jumps. I mean, he was jumping through music to metaphor, to language, to the aging cycle.
Do you, I think you said that you were writing a book. Has it been written? Has it been published?
Absolutely, yes. It's called The Musical Child, and it came out in I'll show you the
Please.
cover. It came out it's at HarperCollins in the US and the UK. It's been sold, actually it's coming out in China fairly soon.
Oh,
And
yeah. Can I see
yeah,
it again? Sorry, I was writing. Can I see it again?
yes, it's the Musical
The
Child.
Musical Child. Yes, I've seen that somewhere. Yes.
Okay. And it's actually coming out in France this week.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And do
So,
you have a website?
yes, there's the school website, and I have a website that is actually dedicated to the book, because what I'm trying to do is to have parents and educators realize that with no musical training, they can still have a profound musical experience with children. You can even do question and answer games playing on pots and pans. You can buy a very inexpensive xylophone and do an incredible amount of work. And if you have none of those things, you can still sing and dance. And the body is a whole orchestra in itself, capable of percussion and melody at the same time. So I'm trying to encourage people to enjoy music with their children and do away with this idea that if they are not trained classical musicians, that they just should go find a music school.
What's the address of your website?
Oh, sorry, it's joankoenig.com.
Okay, Joan Koenig.com.
And the school's website, where there's quite a lot of information
Yes.
too, and some lovely films, is écolekoenig.com. École is just
Yeah.
school in French. But the website is very much linked to the book, because parents may read the book, but the first thing they want to do is they want to hear the music, or they want to see somebody doing that exercise with a child.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I'll let all our audience know about your book, which is called The Musical Child, published by HarperCollins, and your website, écolekoenig.com. And of course, your name is Joan Koenig. And so before we leave, what's the most important thing you have learned in your life? Tell me, please.
Oh, what a beautiful question.
Thank you.
It's something that's coming up a lot right now. I think because I'm beginning to work with children on the autism spectrum, and people who are very much dealing in trying to help people with challenges of any sort. I think that one of the most important things that I've learned is that if you want to heal someone, or if you want to bring out the best in that person, there has to be love in the equation. And I think a good teacher or a good doctor or a good therapist needs to actually feel a kind of compassion and love for anybody they're dealing with. And I can tell you that children feel it immediately. I've it just comes over me. I just look at them and I just automatically feel joy at seeing them. But I've noticed that children feel it. It's nonverbal, and anybody who has this sort of spontaneous love, the children feel it. And you know what? They will get up from where they're sitting and they will go sit in that person's lap. And I think that when you're approaching a child this way, you will not get stuck on one aspect of their development. You're automatically looking at the whole child or the whole adult, and you cannot disassociate cognition from emotion, or you can't separate them into any little compartment and say, we have this data, therefore we're going to do this with this child. I think that it's more difficult, but ultimately I think it's the only road to success is to be able to constantly integrate the entire human being.
Well, Joan, it's just been such a pleasure, really, really. And you just radiate this enthusiasm and love for your work, which I admire greatly. So
well, you do too. But so I wish I had my own podcast because I want to interview you. But
okay, well, start one.
You know what? I might at some point, because I do try to do some events for parents and so on.
Mhm.
So if you would ever accept, I might propose that we have a conversation, which I would ask you
Sure.
some questions and we could record it, and I would make it available to the
Sure.
to the parents in France. And I think that there are a lot of people in France who may not know your work yet,
Mhm.
but I feel it's going in this incredible direction of really understanding.
Well, we are looking for a publisher of my book, The Embodied Mind. So if you know someone.
Oh, well, you know what? I have to actually I have to go on to Evil Amazon and get the book, because that's the only way, that's
Yes, I know.
fastest way to get books in France.
Yeah.
But it's interesting you should mention that, because my publisher in France is called Actes Sud, and they have a very strong line kind of going in this direction. And I think it's a subject that could very much interest them. So I would love to make that presentation.
Oh, I would be forever grateful. Thank you. Thank you in advance. That would be lovely.
And just so you know, the French are crazy about Antonio Damasio, who is also someone
I know.
who's looking at these kinds of questions, not as specifically in terms of I think your studies on intergenerational trauma,
right,
and the infants. I think that this is something that would be very appealing. So,
well, please mention it. Yes,
I will.
Yes, thank
I
you.
will.
And anytime you want to interview me, I would be more than happy to do so.
You may regret that.
No, I will not, Joan. It was such a pleasure. We need to end. Take care and good luck in all the wonderful work that you do.
Thank you so much.
Count me as an admirer and supporter.
Oh, thank you. And I'd like to thank Luciano Volpe, who put us in contact.
Yes,
from
he's a wonderful guy.
Wonderful guy and wonderful podcast.
Yes. Yeah, he's a great guy. Take care. Bye for now.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
See you soon. Bye.